going to talk for a few minutes about how we got into the business of designing and developing a Western Waters digital archives. Give some background. I'd like to take just a minute to take you back to a very brief comment in the question period after Professor Wooster's lecture this morning, and start with that. Before I do that, I would like to thank Joni and Jim for putting the conference together. I think it's wonderful. It's great to be with you. And I would like to acknowledge Jim Dildine, who has been a colleague with us in this whole Western Waters digital initiative, and thank him for all of his efforts. This morning, there was reference to the October 18th issue of Newsweek, which on its cover says something about thirst and global water resources. And I suspect she had a copy of it too. She'll check me to make sure I'm accurate here. I was struck about this concept of liquid asset, I believe is the way it's titled, and how there is an effort in Sitka, Alaska, into a Western community to take its water resources into a very different direction that we have talked about previously. They, through the pure blue water resource of Blue Lake, have 6 billion gallons of water as a resource on the edge of their community. They have negotiated to sell roughly 3 billion gallons to a commercial group, forgotten the name of it, it's immaterial. And the reason they have done this, one, they want the money, some $90 million a year out of it. But the reason is that that 3 billion gallon resource will be loaded into tankers that previously moved oil around the world, and taken to India, where it'll be reprocessed into jugs, plastic jugs probably, of water, and distributed throughout the Middle East and Near East, where thirsty communities are desperate for fresh water. Desperate for fresh water. That's Western water going global. In addition, the article states that by the year 2000, and I believe 2040, that the global demand for fresh water will exceed capacity by 30%. 30%. Those are very serious figures and very serious situations. More in my area of the country, in Utah and across the west to California, we are finding similar kinds of activities going on. One I believe Don's made reference to this morning, and that is the transfer of water out of the Sierra Mountains and out of the Colorado River basin into California and Los Angeles. In my own home state of Utah, you are seeing an effort by Washington County and its county seat, St. George, to convince the federal government and the state government and the private sector to build a pumping canal or pipeline out of Lake Powell and the Colorado River Basin into St. George, a part of the geography of the Great Basin, a movement, a transfer of water, once again. On Indian reservations across, one of them in this state, actually two of them, and several in my state, and in New Mexico and Arizona, you are seeing tribes who are claiming their water rights and are negotiating very hard for those water rights. and they are beginning to sell those water rights into the private sector or into municipalities. It is, as the article points out, all about high transfer and the privatization of water resources that for 2,000 years have been deemed public, and more recently in our country, public utilities, and controlled by the public agencies. We are changing, and we are changing very rapidly. Professor Wooster's comment this morning about change in the 21st century absolutely must be underscored. As Jeff noted, I'm a historian, I'm an archivist, I'm a librarian. I function in a world where we work very hard to build archives and to build collections that have importance to society. In the first 50 years, as he noted, I spent my time learning how to build archives specific for very special needs. I had some wonderful mentors in that world. It was all focused primarily on American Indian tribes located on reservations. And those resources, archives, were used to protect or develop or sue and gain control of natural resources, to build educational curricula, to implant into the social sciences sectors of the schools, the public schools surrounding reservations where the Indian children went to school and had no identifying components to their own culture. We built archives that helped to educate tribes about their own history. The reason I bring it up is that after I got to the Marriott Library, took on the role of running special collections, it allowed me the opportunity to refine the sense of customized archiving and customized archives. I had noted during my years of working with tribes, and I noted it afterwards as I traveled through Nevada, Arizona, and Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, that Indian tribes were constantly having to fight for their water. And they were constantly having to remake the wheel. And by that I mean, every time a tribe started up to go after their rights, their water rights, what they thought were water rights, they had to regather and reinvent the literature, the archives that would support their activities. I also noticed that they turned to the legal community to do that at somewhere between $300 and $500 an hour. And it was very costly to groups of people with very few assets. Being a historian and being an archivist, it dawned on me that my communities of historians, archivists, and librarians knew how to do this, could do it at a minimal cost to what the tribes were paying out. And it charged me to get involved in going around in the 90s to archivist communities or to archivist conferences and weaseling my way onto panels and into discussions where I argued that the community of archivists, the community of historians, and the community of librarians had the ability to do this kind of service to the greater community and should absolutely take it on. When Sarah Mahalik became director at the J. Willard Marriott Library and had been there just a few years, in the latter part of the 90s, she turned to several of us and said, I want to build a digital archives, a super-sized digital archives that has multiple portals, that has multiple institutions contributing to that digital archives, and that the user will, in fact, have a seamless search to the material. I raised my hand and I said, water is the topic. It's the one thing that involves all of the West research institutions, and it is the one thing that pulls us together. It so happened, this is the late 90s, we were also in the beginning of drought, and particularly in the central Rocky Mountain area. It became a 7-year drought. It got pretty darn serious for most of us, but it helped. At the same time, there was a parallel development going on in our research university institutions, and that was the organization and development of Gwilla. Combining Sarah Mihalik's desire with the fact there was a coalition available to try to drive forward some type of digital archives was very, very important and timely. I took on the initiative to convince that group that their topic, that one, doing the digital project in collaboration was an important thing to do, and two, doing it around water was absolutely the thing to do. It has been an amazing trip. I did not understand, even though I had spent 40 years working in and around water, how complex water is, how hard it is to build an archives. I had no idea how we were going to drive the technology together to make it happen. But we have now had most of a decade in building that archives and making it available to the public. And I would like to turn the time over to my colleague with a great thanks and appreciation for all that she has done in making this Western Waters Digital Archives a real thing. Thank you very much.
Okay, as the second half of this duo, I'm going to talk more about the actual development of the Western Waters Digital Library, typically known as the WWDL. Development has been led by the Greater Western Library Alliance, and it's been funded by 2 different grants, one in 2003 to 2005 through IMLS. The most recent grant was awarded by NEH and just concluded this past June. And I should mention that Greg and I were co-PIs on this grant. The objectives at the beginning were to begin developing a comprehensive information resource, as Greg was mentioning, establish the viable technical infrastructure needed, and serve as a collaborative model for similar projects in the future. And initially we focused on adding content related to 4 river basins, the Platte, Colorado, Rio Grande, and Columbia. And these collections are all geographically distributed. 12 of the 30 Gwilla institutions participated in the first grant, and 4 of those 12, plus the Water Resources Center archives at Berkeley, participated in the NEH grant. We are harvesting metadata from these institutions to the central server at Utah, and we're using the PKP harvester, which follows OAI PMH, and most of the sites are using Content DN, but not all. When we started out, all were using Content DN, but some of us have migrated to other digital asset management platforms. And when we harvest the metadata, we only harvest the metadata, not the actual objects. What results is an aggregated index of that metadata that links out to the digital objects at the individual institutions, so that you have virtual, seamless searching of all collections from one website. So one of the overarching issues of this project is that you're always balancing local control versus central usability. But there are a lot of opportunities in a collaboration like this. You can develop collections and solve the technological issues together. You're able to digitize more types of material. You're typically testing and refining and widening the use of your metadata standards. And it's easier to facilitate the publicity that you need to reach out to your end users and stakeholders within a group like this. These are the institutions that participated in the NEH grant phase, and I am going to focus mostly on the second phase and less on the first phase. And during this phase, we engaged a team of 16 archivists, librarians, and technical experts from those 5 institutions. And we also had regular discussions with our faculty advisors with expertise in Western Waters issues. We felt this was really important because they recommended content based on their knowledge of the research value, the uniqueness, the demand by the faculty and other scholars for the materials. And I should mention we are guided by a collection development policy also that was created during the first phase of development. So what were the outcomes? Well, first of all, we expanded our collaborative relationships that we established earlier during the IMLS funded grant phase. And we actually exceeded our objective, which was to digitize 20,000 pages of material related to water policy and environmental history. And we ended up actually digitizing almost 48,000 manuscript pages, legal documents, and photographic images. And we now have over 75,000 images in the WWDL. And we also redesigned and enhanced the WWDL website because one of the things we did was we added an initial repository of EAD finding aids. And I really think that this was one of the items in the grant proposal that really made NEH pay attention. And we also provided multiple ways to retrieve the finding aids through the website. And then we also linked the finding aid entries to the corresponding digital objects for easy access by users. So I'll just stop a minute and show you a few shots of the website. This is what the front page looks like with the search box, a basic description of what you find here, who the audience is. And if you look in the lower right-hand corner, we have featured collections. This rotates every time you bring the website up. And then there's also a tab for the finding aids. This is the advanced search screen, so you can limit your search to the collections of a particular institution if you would like. And you'll see that there's a type drop-down menu at the bottom, and we added EAD to that so that you can bring up all the finding aids together that way. This is the collections page. There are brief description of the collections from which the digital objects come. And then here is where I clicked on the Finding Aids tab, and you can see the list of finding aids, and then you can select one by just clicking on it. And then you go out to, for example, here's a finding aid from Berkeley that's in the Online Archive of California. And again, notice you're going out to the Online Archive of California. This screen, I typed in the search box on the front page the word Apache, and this is your search result. And notice it says right at the top, clicking a result will send you to the institution that hosts that object. We thought we needed to make that really clear for the user. And then if you click on the middle one, here's a letter to Dr. Richard Hart, and you'll see that this is an item owned by the Marriott Library at Utah, as you can see by the branding at the top. And there's also a link back to the Western Waters Digital Library from this page, which makes it easier to navigate. We added that also. This shot just shows one of Colorado State's finding aids, and you'll see in the middle where in the listing it says view, and again it links out directly to the digital object. The site is linked to Google Analytics, and this is a snapshot of activity for the last month. And the little dips in the line represent typically Saturday and Sunday. The usage was way down on the weekend. Usage tends to be highest, I noticed, on Wednesdays and Thursdays. But you'll see that during this month-long period, we had almost 2,800 visits and over 9,000 page views. The average time on the site was 1 minute and 6 seconds, but remember that once you get to the site, you're going out. So that may not sound like much, but again, you're going out. This is a snapshot of where the visitors came from. Most of them did come from the United States, and within the United States, most of them during this period were from California and Texas, Colorado and Utah, Washington State. There was also at least one visitor from Virginia and one from New York State. Other countries included Canada, Germany, Mexico, Russia, and Nigeria. I should also mention that there are, outside of the grant, in other words, these institutions weren't actually participating in the NEH grant, but Jim made some contacts and established relationships with about a dozen institutions who are contributing their metadata through harvesting to the Western Waters Digital Library by expanding the content. And this is just a half of them only. Now, there are a lot of challenges to a project like this, despite the successes we've had. Metadata. The project participants did agree to follow a particular standard, the Western States Dublin Core Metadata Best Practices, the most current version. But the standards do provide considerable latitude for some elements, so there's some differences in interpretation sometimes. And some of the participants are contributing metadata from legacy collections that were created without adherence to this particular standard. And the one thing you have to remember is that aggregation of metadata through the harvesting process reduces search granularity. Any of you are familiar with OAI PMH harvesting knows that those really nice local customized metadata fields that you set up at your site, there's a certain number of them that are just dropped out. They're just not harvested at all because of the way OAI PMH works. Technology, I would say that that's been one of the larger challenges. The harvesting and delivery have been a challenge. We've had to tweak the metadata a number of times to facilitate correct harvesting. There are, whenever you change your local technology, that affects the harvester. For example, if you upgrade to the latest version of Content DM, funky things can happen. And you have to adapt to new and evolving technology constantly on a project like this. And there are newer technologies out there, and so one of the things we're starting to ask is, should we use something other than Content DM for the digital asset management system? Something other than the PKP harvester? Or another consideration is, instead of harvesting metadata, would it be better to just have copies of content stored in a central location and deliver it that way? Who monitors and maintains the website? I'll have to admit that when I was poking around in the WWDL the other day for this presentation, I did find a broken link. I saw a finding aid set that had been dropped out, so we're going to have to look into that. But somebody needs to stay on top of this kind of thing. And right now, the site is being hosted at Utah, but will Utah always want to continue to host it? Communication is another issue. Yes, we have WILA direction and oversight, and during both phases of the grant, we had regular conference calls. We would meet at ALA. We use the Basecamp software to deliver email messages, but consortia tend to be fragile, and misunderstandings can arise as a result of miscommunication, especially when you're all working separately at different institutions, and you also have competing priorities at your local institutions, and so you can get bogged down in some project and forget to communicate the information that's needed. So that's something you really have to stay on top of. And then, of course, there's funding. We all know funding of public universities is shrinking, our costs are increasing, and our digital projects are typically reliant on the reallocation of existing resources. We don't get new resources for this kind of thing. The good news is that collaborative projects have become quite attractive to funding organizations in general, but of course you have to remember that there's a cost to administering a grant. So one of our big questions is, now that we finish the second phase of development, where do we go from here? Who will conduct usability studies? I think that's a really important piece of this. Who should initiate the next development phase? And this is a biggie. What content should be added next? And where should we seek funding? And how do we keep abreast of developing technology and also remain user-focused? I think sometimes there's a tendency for librarians to develop products like this based on what we think the user wants, and we need to stay focused on what the user says they want. So we'll be interested to hear any comments you might have. So thank you very much.